An amendment to Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill, which aims to regulate discussion in schools on sexual orientation and gender identity, has been withdrawn. The amendment would have required schools to basically out students to their parents if they found out the student identifies as anything other than straight.
The amendment was supposed to be debated Tuesday, but its backer, Florida Republican State Representative Joe Harding, withdrew the amendment an hour before legislators were scheduled to meet, saying in a statement, quote, "The exaggeration and misrepresentation in reporting about the amendment was a distraction. All the amendment did was create procedures around how, when, and how long information was withheld from parents so that there was a clear process and kids knew what to expect. Nothing in the amendment was about outing a student. Rather than battle misinformation, I decided to focus on the primary bill that empowers parents to be engaged in their children's lives." It sounds like it would have outed students, though, despite his saying that was misinformation.
Everyone just calls everything misinformation, even if it's true,
right,
from the White House to this dude. So while that amendment has been withdrawn, the underlying bill continues to move through Florida's State House and Senate chambers, and similar bills are cropping up throughout the country. Critics of this type of legislation say it endangers LGBTQ youth, citing data from the Trevor Project, which estimates that at least one LGBTQ youth between the ages of 13 to 24 attempts suicide every 45 seconds in the United States. Pennsylvania House candidate and advisor to the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Jonathan Lovitz, is here with us to discuss. And so, Jonathan, let's dispatch with this first piece here. He claims it's misinformation that the amendment would require the outing of students, and then says that the amendment would require the outing of students, but it sets up a process for the student to be outed. Maybe he doesn't. There's no way to parse that. Is he just lying here?
I think he was upset being outed as a bigot. And I think he's being upset that he is being outed as someone furthering an agenda that's going to result in dead LGBTQ youth. Bills like this hurt people. I know that because I'm a graduate of a Florida public school. And if I wasn't afforded the chance to be who I was when I was a teenager, I wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't be a part of the movement trying to fight back against heinous bills like this. Our kids deserve better than this. And for especially a party that is obsessed with getting government out of our lives, they sure love putting it into our classrooms and into our bedrooms and into our bathrooms.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's interesting. I still have adult friends and family even, who are unwilling to come out to, maybe their parents for whatever reason, people in their 30s and 40s. I mean, I think many of us know people who are still living without their families understanding or knowing what their sexual orientation is. And I don't know if it's really any of their business to my viewpoint. But what is the point of this bill? Can you explain to us what this bill even, to me, it's just so odd. I mean, are we in 2022? Like, what is the point of this bill in general?
The point of this bill is cruelty. It's to run to the right of Trump and his acolytes to say that we can be the most hateful state in the union and encourage more states to jump on and continue hurting people. And remember, LGBTQ youth aren't just, they're not just LGBTQ. They're young women. They're young people of color. They're young immigrants. They're future veterans. They're young people with disabilities. Any attack on them is an attack on all other young communities. And that's the point here. It's the othering of people. It's creating divisions, and it's not right.
I don't know that that's the. Maybe that is the effect. I don't know that is in all cases the intention. And look, I think this bill is very bad and should not exist, and the ones like it shouldn't either. Obviously, kids need to be able to express and discuss their sexuality and gender identity, especially past a certain age when they're entering puberty, with counselors, etc. I think, though, if I'm trying to present the best argument for not this but something like this, the concerns that at a much younger age, like as young as kindergarten and so on, there is being taught, obviously not being taught to be gay or something like that, but being taught or exposed to a very kind of progressive activist thinking on honestly more so gender than sexuality, that is still very kind of divisive even among adults, even among some progressive people, and that there would be education about the kind of ideology or redefinition of what gender is, Now, does this bill actually it does not narrowly confine itself to this, so I would be, again, to be clear, totally against it, but I think that is a concern that is more legitimate that some families have.
Well, and it's a parallel to what we're seeing about the nonsense about so-called critical race theory. No one is indoctrinating your kids to learn the truth about American history. It's the truth. Your kid will turn out to be LGBTQ whether you stop them learning about it in school. Their teacher is still going to be gay whether you tell them they can't put a family photo on their desk like their straight counterparts can. It is a lie to say that this is about creating any kind of safe space. It's about creating a space where only one type of ideology is appropriate. And it's going to have major ramifications for the state. Look at what happened to places like North Carolina when the bathroom bills were introduced, and they lost tens of billions of dollars in investment. There is a major movement now to calling on Disney, calling on Universal, calling on all of these major folks who get huge tax breaks and incentive from the state of Florida to throw their weight around. They've got LGBT cast members, they've got LGBT fans and attendees and people who support them who are saying, stop allowing your friends in Tallahassee to hurt us. It's wrong.
I mean, I could see maybe a little bit of for both sides, this bill being beneficial to some degree. Obviously, if we remove some of these amendments, like an amendment to notify parents if your child is anything other than straight, is very bizarre. And again, I cannot believe we're in 2022 and somebody's actually proposing this. But the regulation of the discussion in schools, to Robbie's point, I can understand where maybe parents on both sides of this issue would say, I want some regulation on this. For one, I don't want my kindergartner, there's got to be an age limit to when we start discussing gender identities, which could be a very confusing topic for young kids, or not, right? Or maybe they say, no, we can start discussing that young, or definitely sexual orientation. And I could see where there maybe could be something in this legislation that says you have to teach that there are more than one, it's not just straight people and straight people only. So that would be protective for LGBTQ, but then it could also go the other way, right? Where it's like maybe people that are very highly conservative still in today's world would say, no, I don't want them learning anything about that. I mean, can you see some protective benefit for the LGBTQ? Or is this bill, if you've read it in its entirety, exclusionary?
It is, because it sets up a terrible precedent that people who have no educational experience, no psychology experience, no healthcare experience are going to start setting curriculums. After you start telling teachers you have to regulate what you say in the classrooms about gender identity and sexual orientation, we then go to race, we then go to discussions about pregnancy, we then go to discussions about things that are part of everyday life. And yet now we're going to force teachers to have to be the arbiters of very real truths. And that's not fair to them either. If you want to teach your kid about particular religious points of view, that's what religious schools are for. But public schools should be a place to learn about every type of person and every type of situation in the world. And it would be a fallacy to say that kids are not being indoctrinated when they're watching Disney movies in their kindergarten classrooms that show one boy and one girl living happily ever after, when we know that's not how the world works. There are so many variations on that theme.
But I don't think you wouldn't agree that teachers can just, even in public schools, they can't just teach whatever they want, right? What if they're teaching creationism? Right. We would say that no, the relevant education officials who are elected, so via this process of input from the families and the communities and the parents, there will be some structure for the range of things teachers are allowed to teach. And again, I absolutely agree. If restrictions say they can't, a gay teacher couldn't say they have a husband, or you can't, right, even discuss these topics at all. Very wrong and bad. But I don't know the impulse to want to keep, again, more on the gender stuff, where I think the things very left-wing people are saying about gender norms are much more hotly debated and controversial than same-sex marriage or other aspects of what the liberal social policy that has become normal, which is a good thing. But these things are still very controversial. So the idea that kindergartners would learn about it, not if the kindergartner says, I have some question about gender identity, you're not going to be allowed to talk about it, but that it makes its way into the curriculum. I do think that's happening to some degree, and that's what this very clumsy effort is trying to address.
It's also trying to, I think on the pro side, on the positive side of this, we're reminding people that those historic norms don't work in a modern context. If you're still asking your kindergartners to color boys blue and girls pink, you're doing a disservice to the fact that we all exist on a spectrum, and it's not for you to decide how we identify. That's not a school's responsibility. It's not even a parent's responsibility. That is up to the student themselves, and they need the freedom to know that whatever they want to be, however they want to express themselves, is true and valid and respected. And that needs to start in public schools because it continues all the way through their entire adult lives. There's a reason that the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, says that still as many as 50%, if not more, people are in the closet in the workplace because they're afraid of what could happen to their outcomes. And that goes all the way back to what they were taught about being ashamed of themselves decades ago in school. So we do have an obligation to our kids, regardless of what the issue is, to make an open and welcoming space. In the same way, when I was in my public high school in Florida, where I was allowed to come out at 16, I remember my AP English teacher saying, we're going to read parts of the Bible because it's literature, not because it's religion. And we're going to discuss it and have a critical conversation about it. That's what's missing. We're judging before we ever give people a chance to bring perspectives to the table.
And Jonathan, let me ask you if you think this is how this is unfolding. So as Robbie alluded to, I think a lot more of this is about gender than it is about sexuality. And the national conversation around gender has moved dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think what you're seeing is a reaction among a lot of parents and a discomfort with how that conversation is unfolding and at what ages is appropriate to start having that conversation. And into that, people who are still fighting a rearguard action on kind of the gay right, LGBT rights that they've lost on. They lost on marriage equality, they lost on some of these other issues. They're now using the controversy around gender issues to kind of smuggle in and try to refight some of those old fights. Do you think that that's something that's going on here?
Oh, sure. Just like we saw a reaction after marriage equality to try to redefine all kinds of state policies that would be ways to counteract some of the provisions that were enacted through that. Similarly with the Masterpiece Cake Shop case and then the Bostock decision about workplace equality. There were then attempts made at various state levels, state legislatures, even school boards, to try to turn back the tide on some of that. And they lost. And they'll keep losing. Because if you look at some of the recent reporting, young people are more diverse and more accepting of themselves and of their peers being different than any kind of binary than ever before. And so I'm sorry that a few parents are uncomfortable, but their kids are suffering. Their kids' friends are suffering. And we cannot allow the state to regulate hate just because a few parents are uncomfortable about it. And these parents are taking up arms by joining school boards, by joining county commissions that are trying to change the way we talk about things. We do not ban books in this country. We do not ban movies in this country. We let people make their own decisions. Remember, it's the party of choice and freedom that is the most actively oppressing people who want to allow people to choose and be free to live who and how they are. These binaries are gone. People exist on a spectrum. They always have, they always will. And people from Florida to Alaska and everywhere in between need to get on board with that.
But I wonder if there's a trucker parallel in a way. That there are extreme elements within kind of this trucker convoy, this trucker politics, but there are also legitimate people that have legitimate grievances.
I mean, I think there are extremes on it's like the fear, and I don't think this is a totally unreasonable fear. There are some in the activist progressive community on gender issues who will say that yes, if the little girl draws colors the boy in blue, the kindergartner, then they want the teacher to have a conversation with that. You might be a boy then,
which is just reproducing the same norms that you're
right. Parents don't want that to happen, and I agree with them.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I disagree. No one's asking the teachers to get involved here. What we're asking is that we make sure that the schools, the environments are safe. We're not at no one. There is no legislation. There is no call for this kind of education to be a part of the daily curriculum. Thankfully, we do have some school boards and education systems around the country adding LGBTQ competency alongside racial history, gender history, women's rights, etc. But that's not what's being done here. What we're telling people is if you so much as assume things about a student, you have to run to their parents, you have to put them in counseling. This goes against everything every medical professional knows is right, every educational professional knows is right. We're not asking teachers to be involved in the shaping of young lives. We're asking them to make sure that no one is hurting those young lives while they're trying to figure it out for themselves.
Certainly, I think that aspect of the bill, we're all very like, that's got to go. I mean, that is ridiculous. But maybe there is more debate to be had at some point in the future regarding whether or not there should be any sort of regulation in the classroom when it comes to discussions about gender or sexual orientation. But Jonathan, very fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Tomorrow on Rising, Andrew Feldman and Emily Jashinsky are here for our Rising panel.
And co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast and host of the Katie Halper Show, Katie Halper herself joins us to weigh in on White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki's inspiration for returning to politics.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our incredible content. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Superb content.
Absolutely superb. See you then.